Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm Joey Dwyer here alongside Brandon Bigsby. It's an exciting episode, Brandon, one we've waited for a long time, ever since you got on staff. Our season preview basketball episode last year. Obviously, it was a good season preview episode, but I think Billy and I were wrong about a lot of stuff. Hopefully, me and you nail it down a little bit more this year. It's an interesting year for Mark Byington. Year one, he's got an old team, but a team with some deficiencies. They played 2 secret scrimmages, went 1-1 against 2 teams that I think are pretty good. Brandon, I'm going to swing it to you after I shout out the Wash House, our presenting sponsor for basketball season. But I think this is a year where there's going to be a lot of variability. What's your general expectation for this?
I think the biggest thing is you just want to see growth and progression within this program. And I feel like that's really been the word of the summer that both of us have used since we started talking about this team. But when you just see where this program was 7 or 8 months ago, and it just felt like everything was so barren in recruiting, in the staff, within the mass exodus of players, it seemed like they were pretty much on their way out. And then you fast forward now going into November, and there's this feeling of belief and hope and like there is a future. I don't think that you can necessarily say that Vanderbilt has to make the tournament this year. They have to make it to March Madness. Obviously, that's what you want. That's what you aim for. There's an expectation within that locker room for that to be the case. But I think a general expectation is that you want to see this team compete. You want to see them continue to grow. And you want to see them make progress throughout the season, because you have to remember this is a new coach with an entirely different system. And more importantly, this is a team of players that have never played together for the most part before this season. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things go. But I think for me, can this team get better as the year goes on? And do we see progression within the program that can make Vanderbilt a destination for recruiting and in the transfer portal past year one?
I think this year could be a huge springboard for this program. I don't think they necessarily have to make the tournament this year, and we're going to talk about their odds to do it, things along those lines as we go. But I just think it has to be refreshing. It has to be a product that people want to come see. And I think that starts with getting it going early. You can't lose to Maryland Eastern Shore. You can't lose to SEMO. People have to want to come see this team, and they have to have a reason to continue to come back and see it. And I have some optimism that they can. I think this is an old team that can do a lot of things really well. They've a lot of guys who can handle point guard responsibilities. They got a lot of scorers, a lot of shooting. They're going to get up and down. They're going to play fast. I just think this is a team people are going to want to gravitate towards in some senses. Now, does that mean they're going to be a Sweet 16 team? No. But I do think they're a team that people are going to be interested in at the very least. And I think that's just a huge step from kind of the barren label that we had put on the program 7 or 8 months ago. There's life in this program. Now it's about the honeymoon stage ending, and you got to be able to continue that. Can you go and beat Maryland Eastern Shore by a decent amount? Can you go beat SEMO by a decent amount? Can you make a statement in that Cal game? I think it's all about how you start, but also they got to be a lot better by the end of the year. I think that's going to tell you a lot about Mark Byington's coaching ability and kind of the makeup of this roster, because they're going to have a lot of guys who are able to come back. They've got a lot of juniors next year. They could be a really old team next year. This year, you've got to see progress towards that, and you've got to have a pitch in the spring to where you're looking at it and say, man, you can make the tournament if you add a couple guys.
Yeah, and I think that during the non-conference schedule, we're going to kind of see that first step of, okay, how much has the program and has this team progressed compared to last year? You can't go in and struggle against teams like Maryland Eastern Shore, like how this team struggled against Central Arkansas or USC Upstate last year. Those are games that this year, if the program has progressed, that's not a game you can only win by 5. That's got to be a game you win by 20 plus points on your home floor against a inferior team. So little things like that I think will go a long way. But you mentioned something else there as well, Joey, that I think is a good point. I think that at least within the Vanderbilt fan base, from people I've talked to and from things that we've both heard, I think people just want to see this program be fun again. Mm-hmm. And when you go back to some of those Vanderbilt teams, obviously, when they were ranked in the 2000s, when they were competing for tournament spots in the 2010s, sure, not all of those teams were ranked in the top 25 and making it to Sweet 16s, but it was a fun product to watch. People could go into Memorial Gym and say, hey, you know what? We might be a team that's in the bubble conversation, but it's a fun team to watch. And I think that at least at bare minimum, with the style that they have, with the roster that Mark Byington has put together, I think that you can at least expect to see a fun product on the floor, even if that doesn't mean that this team goes and wins 20 games and finishes in the top 6 or 7 in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the calling card of this team. I think they are going to be fun. I think they're going to play hard. I think they're going to attack. That's what Mark Byington talked about all year last year at JMU, is that he wanted his team to attack. I think they're going to be aggressive defensively, and I think offensively it's where they're going to hang their hat early. I do have some concerns about maybe their versatility offensively. I think they might be a little reliant on the three ball early based off kind of their secret scrimmage results, and I'm also a little worried about the defense. But at the very least, I think they're old. I think everybody on the court can pass, dribble, and shoot, which I don't think you necessarily saw in past years. I think this year everyone has a skill set, everyone's a weapon, and I think that's what makes this team capable and even scary in some senses, because I think they're probably one of the bottom tier SEC teams, but that's more of a result of the league being really good. I think, though, they're a team that is going to be really enjoyable to watch a lot of nights. And some nights they may throw up thunkers and they may go get beat by 40 or 50 against Alabama. And I don't think that's the end of the world for this style of play. I think there are going to be off nights, but I also think there's going to be nights where you go and beat a team that you shouldn't beat and everybody's on the train. And I think that's what's going to make this year so interesting, because I think they're going to be really high variance. I think they could go into Alabama, and if they have a lights out shooting night, they could go win that game. But also you're looking at it and saying, man, you could lose to Austin Peay if everything goes poorly. I do think that they're old enough to where they may be beyond some of those things. I don't know if it's going to be as variable as some of the previous non-conference seasons that we've seen. I don't expect them to go lose to a team like Grambling State or Southern Miss. But I also would say they're probably going to play a few games closer than maybe you'd hope. But then they're probably going to make up for it by going and beating a team that they probably shouldn't beat. That's kind of what I expect from this team. And I think more than anything, it's a journey, and it's more so just being along for the ride rather than every single game being indicative of the state of the program. Because I think this style doesn't play to that. I think the style is one night you could be a team that looks like a top 5 team in the league, and then one night you could look like far and away the worst team in the league. I think that's just kind of how it's going to work this year.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of variance in the results that we get. I mean, like you said, I think that there's going to be some nights where you go in and you're like, man, this Vanderbilt team could make a run and go all the way to the Sweet 16 if they get hot. And then there's going to be some to where it's like, yeah, I see why they were 16th in the SEC poll. And that's going to happen, I think, when you have, again, a play style like this in the SEC, so many new guys, a completely new staff. And something I remember when we talked to Mark Byington in the presser a month ago, he said very honestly, we have not worked on much defense until we just got in the building just now. So it's a defense, I think, especially too, that's going to have to really take time and kind of form and kind of mold. But I think that something else that's going to be very interesting too to watch is this team, as you mentioned, there's so many guys that could come back next year. And a lot of these guys, again, it's not a bunch of mid-major guys that are coming up. Sure, you have some of those players and guys like Jalen Carey, guys like Jason Edwards, but there's also players with good pedigree too. A guy like A.J. Hoggard that comes in from Michigan State. A guy like Alex Hemingway, who, though you're not necessarily expecting him to come in and start and play 25 minutes a night, comes from a program that just made it to the Elite Eight in Clemson. And then you have, obviously, Tyler Nickel and MJ Collins, who come in from a Virginia Tech team that's had some good years over the last couple of times they've been there. So it's a team to where I don't think that there's just a clear expectation of what exactly is going to happen night to night. But I do think the one thing you can expect is that it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be a team to where you'll see a lot of different guys, I think, step up. That's something Vanderbilt has lacked in the last few years. I think that in the last few teams, it felt like, okay, it has to be Scottie Pippen Jr. It has to be Ezra Monroe. It has to be Liam Robbins. It has to be Tyron Lawrence. I think that with this team, you might see MJ Collins go off for 18 one night, or you might see someone else go off, Tyler Nickel go off for 20-plus one night. I think that it doesn't have to always be the same guy that has to play well and has to give you 20-plus points in order for them to win games, and that's something Vanderbilt has lacked in the past. I think this year that they'll see mitigated a little bit. There's so much depth, especially at the guard spot.
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword here, because you're looking at it and saying, man, they don't have a guy. And yeah. I don't think that they're going to have a guy who's an all-SEC player when it's all said and done. Maybe A.J. Hoggard does that. Maybe Tyler Nickel does that. Maybe Jason Edwards puts up such great scoring numbers that he's in that conversation. But I'm expecting them to be a team that kind of does it by committee. You look at the exhibitions they've played or the secret scrimmages. I think in both games they had 5 guys in double figures. And I think they only had one who scored 20-plus in each of the games, which is crazy because they scored 96 points in the second one. But I just think they're going to be a team that everybody's going to have to do it, and it's not going to be A.J. Hoggard scoring 30. I think the only guy with 30-plus potential is Edwards, but I do think that you're going to have a team where everybody's a threat to score, Everybody's a threat to put it on the floor. Everybody's a threat to make the extra pass and get in the paint. And I think that's what maybe makes this team dangerous. I want to talk about the 16th in the preseason poll thing. They were voted last in the SEC preseason poll, not by me. Brandon, I had a vote and I put them 13th, I think, maybe 12th. I think 12th. That's something that they've responded to a little bit. AJ Hoggard said, sometimes I think certain things call for a chip, and I think that did. I think that kind of motivated our team. We needed it a little bit. I think they're going to be a team almost similar to Vandy football, to where Mark Byington talked about how he wanted guys who were proven as transfers, but he also wanted guys who thought that they had more ahead of them. AJ Hoggard's an example. He's a guy who thinks he's an NBA player. I think most of the country doesn't think AJ Hoggard's an NBA player. This team's going to have a chip, and I just want to kind of raise it to you. This is not, in my mind, a team that finishes 16th in the SEC. They're going to be high variance. They're probably going to lose some games they shouldn't. I think they're way too talented to be a team that finishes last in the league. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I see them more at around that 12 to 13 range. I just have a hard time seeing this team with the depth and the overall collection of talent that they have being the worst team in the SEC. Now, if you want to say maybe they're 14th, fine, I'll give you that. Maybe they drop a game or two, they shouldn't. But to finish last in the SEC, Vanderbilt didn't finish last in the SEC in some of Stackhouse's worst years. So I think that when you put it up to that level,
they did finish last in the league
last year. Yeah. So I just have a hard time seeing that happen. Missouri was last in the league last year and were a much worse team than Vanderbilt was, both in talent and in roster. So I have a hard time seeing that. But I think, too, that you mentioned that chip on the shoulder. You can go over on the women's side and use them as a very good example. A year ago, they were picked to finish last in the SEC. And obviously, they came off a rough year the year before, were very injury-riddled. There were a lot of questions about who's going to really step up outside Jordan Cambridge, if she's going to get the scoring support. Vanderbilt went in and not only became one of the surprises of the SEC, but at times looked like a top 5 team in the SEC, made the tournament, won a game. I'm not saying that this team will do the exact same thing, but I do think that Vanderbilt as a roster can compete in the SEC a little bit more than what it feels like media and coaches outside of yourself, obviously, have given them credit for. So I think that's a good thing that there's a chip on their shoulder. It kind of shows that, hey, no one really believes in us outside this locker room. And that is a very dangerous thing to have as a team because you almost kind of go in with nothing to lose.
Yeah, and I think the system kind of helps differentiate the talent, or not differentiate, narrow the talent gap a little bit. And I don't know that there's as much of a talent gap as there's been made out to be, but I think if there is one, the way they're going to play is certainly helpful for them. I think a lot of possessions hurts them a little bit if the talent gap is really that big, but I think they're going to shoot a lot of threes. They're going to get up and down. They're going to get a lot of easy baskets. My concern with the scheme and the way they're going to play, can they guard enough? I mean, those secret scrimmages, 102 points by Clemson, 89 by UAB. I think they're really going to have some work to do defensively. And for what I've heard, it's not that they're incapable of playing good defense. It's that they just don't right now. And I think that is fixable from what I've heard. But I do wonder, do they guard enough to be able to be a consistently good team in the SEC, a team that wins consistently? Because I don't know that they have the talent to be able to race to 95 against SEC teams. Because I think there are teams that are more talented than them. My question for them is, man, can you guard enough to be able to win 18 or 19 games? Because I think my projection right now, and we'll talk about this a little more, is that they win 18 or 19. They've got to be able to defend a little bit more to get there. I do think they have some good individual defenders. Hogarth's a good defender. Tyler Nickel, I think, is a good defender. MJ Collins might be their best. Jalen Carey, I think, is pretty physical. So there's some capability there. They don't have a shot blocker. We know that. I do think they have a chance to be better defensively than they are right now, though, and that's the path, I think.
Yeah, and I think, again, you have to go back to remembering that this team didn't really work much on defense over the summer. So, again, this is a very new and fresh version of the Vanderbilt defense. I almost want to say it's kind of like a beta version of what their defense could look like. I think we'll see it progressively get better. It might not look great in November. It looks a little better in December. And I think you hope if you're Mark Byington, by January, that's when things are really starting to click. You kind of know what you have defensively, and these guys are just starting to mesh together, because I feel like a lot of times when people think defense, you think, okay, one-on-ones, matchups, 5 versus 5, 1 versus 1, etc. But it's such a collective defensively when you start talking about schemes and communication. And those are the things that I think that can they hone those things? And they might not necessarily be the most talented group defensively, but as you said, I think that they have the capabilities to be at least a decent team defensively. And if they can do that, the offense can be there to make up for them not necessarily being an elite defensive team. It's just, can it be good enough to where if they're going to score 90, can they not allow 95 or 100? That's the big question for this group.
I think that is a huge question for them right now. And I do think that you're going to see November 4th, you're going to look at it and be like, man, can they guard it all? Yeah. But I think in December, you're going to start to maybe see some signs that it gets a little better. And I want to touch on the high variance offense thing a little bit too. Tyler Nicholas talked about how they're dynamic offensively. He said, when you're dynamic and play as fast as we play, everybody can get money. I think that's kind of the calling card for this team. Like we mentioned, they're going to be balanced. I do wonder, do they have an out pitch offensively? Because I don't know if they have a guy. I think Jason Edwards maybe making a play off the bounce might be their calling card. I think Jalen Carey posting up could be maybe a run stopper or a tourniquet of sorts. My question for the offense, they don't have a guy, right? And they're going to shoot a lot of threes. I will say, though, last year they didn't shoot over 40% from three in a game. I think this team is much better shooting. Even like the shot releases, much prettier, much cleaner. I think they're going to take better ones. And I think getting up and down is going to help them kind of get in a rhythm offensively. I just don't know if they can beat teams racing to 100. That's my big question offensively. And I think that's what's going to determine a lot of this. Brandon, I want to talk about your expectations for this team, though. We're going to go a little more in-depth player by player as we go. But broadly, what's the win range that you're kind of pinpointing? What's the postseason outcome? Is there a postseason outcome? I think that's what the season is going to be defined by. Let's get your take.
So I think that just looking at this roster and the schedule and just everything that we know about this team, because a lot of the things that we've seen so far have held up to what we thought of this group over the summer. And I think that when we were talking about this team in July and August, we felt like around 17 to 18 wins is probably around what you would like to see. Anything better, amazing. Love to see it. Anything less, I don't think you're panicking. You probably would like to see a little bit better. But then again, first-year coach, a totally new group that does have some deficiencies within the roster and within the way that the makeup is of this team on that defensive side. And that's going to lose them some games. Like, I don't think that there's any question about that there's probably going to be at least 2 or 3 games this year to where it's like if they just played a little bit of defense, they would have won this game. And I feel like that's going to be the difference between them being, say, a 20-win team and maybe a 17-win team. But I do think that 17-win mark is probably where I would have them at. NCAA tournament team, no. Could they maybe compete for the NIT again? That I do think is possible. I know that Vanderbilt fans are probably a little bit sick of the NIT at that point. That'd be 3 of the last 4 years. But remember, new coach, complete reset of the program. I think you're happy with that, and I think you take it. And Joey, you mentioned something I want to say as well. This is a team that does not necessarily have that one guy, and I think that is probably one of the biggest differences from this Vandy roster compared to so many of the other ones. Because even before Jerry Stackhouse, Bryce Drew had a guy. It was Darius Garland, then it was Saban Lee, then it was Scottie Pippen Jr., then it was Tyron Lawrence, then it was Ezra Manjon. This is the one team where I feel like when you match up against Vanderbilt and look at them on the film, it's not just, okay, just crash towards Scottie Pippen Jr. and make someone else make a play. You kind of have to guard everyone. There might not be that one guy that's going to give you 25 plus each night, but I do think it makes it a little bit harder for opposition to predict who's going to be the guy that night. So that's something that I think can go to their advantage as well. They might not have that one bona fide just scorer, so to speak, that's going to be an all SEC caliber player. But I do think that maybe having a lot of different guys that can pitch in by committee can be a bit of an advantage as well.
Yeah, and I think we oftentimes, when a team doesn't have a star, we'll say, oh, they're just going to be balanced, right?
Yeah.
Just by nature of them not having a star. This team legitimately has guys who can go get points. Jason Edwards could, I think, has scored 20 plus in both the secret scrimmages. He'll be a guy who makes plays. AJ Hoggard, we've seen he can be a scorer at the Power 5 level consistently, averaged double figures the last 2 years. Not worried about him. Devin McLaughlin can do it. I don't know that you want to put your whole offense in Devin McLaughlin's hands, but he can do it. MJ Collins, I think, could really be a good player for you in spurts. I don't know how high volume he'll be night to night, but if he gets a chance to be, he'll be really good. And then Tyler Nickel, I think, has a chance to even be their best player. Maybe if he's not the leading scorer, but I think the reviews from him have been rave throughout the summer and fall. He'll be a guy who makes plays. Jalen Carey will play and be able to make an impact as a scorer, especially on the perimeter. So it's not like we're just saying, man, they don't have a guy, so they're going to by nature be balanced and have guys who can step up. I think they legitimately do have guys who can step up. And that's why I think that this team does have some capability. I think they could be a 20-win team if all goes right. I think they're going to have to defend more. They're going to have to figure out a way to play without being capable in the front court like other teams are. And there's not a, I want to point out too, not a team in the league that just blows you away in the front court, really. Janai Broome is good. I think he's probably going to take Jalen Carey's lunch money once or twice, but I think they have a chance to kind of negate that. What I'm more concerned about in the front court is the depth, and that's something that I just look at and say, man, there's so much on Jalen Carey's shoulders. There's never been this much on his shoulders at the college level, especially the Power 5 level, and that's what I'm worried about as well. Worried about the defense. Maybe at times worried about them not having a guy, although Jason Edwards probably in the last couple seconds is going to be a guy they could turn to. So I think they are a team that is capable of winning 20-plus games and getting to the tournament. But I think with them being so high variance and them not having the front court that a team like Alabama has, which is a team that wants to play high variance, and Florida has a better front court as well, and they want to play high variance, I think the path includes not much margin for error. And by nature of that, I think they're probably going to be an 18 or 19 win team, maybe 17, probably make the NIT, and I think that's a solid year one for Mark Byington.
Yeah, and I think that, again, going back to just the foundation of all this we've talked about, which is progress, I think that that shows good progress of where this program is and where it's headed. If you can get 17, 18, 19 wins, and I think that that shows, okay, Vanderbilt is not a bad team. It's not a bad program. You know, you've mentioned something, the Vanderbilt has been bad for so long tax. I think that tax gets minimized a bit if you can go out, show that you can win games, show that you can compete in the SEC, and then make a postseason tournament, even if that's not the NCAA tournament. So I think that that's why that's so big a little bit as well. And you mentioned something too. I think that's why my expectations maybe are almost tempered a little bit. I feel like 17 is being safe. I could see this team going in and winning 20 games, but just again, some of those questions with the biggest one to me, what does that front court look like? Because the pressure on Jalen Carey, and again, Jalen Carey had a great summer. They've raved about him. Probably one of the players they have been the most impressed by alongside him and Tyler Nickel. But that is so much to put on his shoulders. And I feel like there's going to be some points where you look at this game and you're like, they just need one more guy with him. And that's where you're going to miss Kajani Wright. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how J.Q. Roberts steps up. Now, what his role looks like, what his minutes look like, not totally sure yet. I know we'll talk about rotations in a little bit, but I think there's going to be a little bit of pressure on him to step up, because if you have a game to where, you know, Jalen Carey gets 2 fouls in the first 5 or 6 minutes, that's going to force J.Q. Roberts to step up and play the 5. And if not him, then you're looking at Devin McLaughlin playing the 5, which I think that in a pinch he has the capabilities to do so, but then the physical aspect of it, that does get a little bit tougher when you're talking about matching up with 6'10 guys in the SEC down low in the paint. So those are some of the reasons I think that my expectations are maybe slightly more tempered, but I still do think that the team has that capability to reach that 20-win mark. It's just, can they mitigate some of those issues and some of those flaws within this team on a consistent enough basis to steal a few games?
And something we got to address too is the league is just so difficult.
Yeah.
And if they were in the ACC, I would probably predict them to win 20 games, go to the tournament, to be honest with you. If they were in just about every other power conference, barring maybe the Big 12, I would say they're going to win 20 games and get to the tournament.
Big East, you could argue they're a championship contender over there.
Maybe not with UConn, but
outside UConn.
Outside of UConn, but the SEC is just so difficult. I was looking at it and I'm saying, man, I'm probably going to pick them higher than most people in the preseason poll. And then I look at it and say, man, I'm going to have a hard time not putting them 14 or 15. And I had to maybe put a little more faith in them just because I've seen them more than other people did to even put them at 13. And that's crazy to me. Like, the worst teams in the league you're looking at are like Georgia, who has Tyron Lawrence, who was a borderline all-SEC player one year. You're looking at Mizzou, who added a completely revamped transfer class. Oklahoma, who's really well coached with Porter Moser. There's not a team that you can sleep against in the league. And you hear that in every league, right? You hear that in the ASUN. This is the best league in college basketball, though. And that's why it's so difficult to project this team to be a tournament team in year one. They have such an uphill climb. And even if they didn't have an uphill climb, it's just such a hard league to win in. Every team is really talented. most teams don't even have a deficiency, and Vanderbilt has a deficiency with the front court, and that's what I look at and say, well, if they're not going to be a tournament team, it's that, and paired with the defense. And it's not that it's a huge glaring weakness, it's that they're going to be made to pay for it night in and night out because of the league they're in.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you raised too, because the SEC is so different because of how deep this conference is. I mean, if you compare it to some of these other conferences, like in the ACC, you have Duke, you have North Carolina. I don't think there's a whole lot of people that are expecting too many other contenders outside of them. You look at the Big East, outside of UConn, you can maybe throw Xavier in there. Not a whole lot, or Providence as well. Not really a whole lot of people that you're like, okay, those are bona fide tournament teams, no question. Vanderbilt just happens to be in the toughest conference in the country, and there's not much competition there.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some games to where you feel like they were good, but just not good enough compared to that competition. And it doesn't mean it's not a good team. I think that Vanderbilt's a very good team, and that in just about, as you said, any other conference in the country, and I'm saying this team can make the tournament and be around a 9 seed or so. Mm-hmm. But being in the SEC and then just adding that with the circumstances and the context of where the roster is, that's what makes them get knocked down a little bit more. So they might not be the 14th ranked team in terms of how good they can be, but just when you consider everyone else around them, that's what does knock them down a little bit.
And I almost think in our projections, there's a little bit of a flaw as well, because we're projecting it like it's a normal league. We have no idea what the resumes are going to look like come March in this league, because there's 16 teams. All of them are going to help your strength of schedule. You're probably going to go up with a 5-point loss to just about any team in the net, which is crazy for me to say. So they could be a top 40 team with 16 or 17 wins at the end of the year. It might be crazy to say, but they could be a legitimate tournament contender without having your normal tournament win total. And it's going to be interesting to see what the committee does with that, because I think they're only going to want to put like 10 or 11 in at most in the SEC. So Vanderbilt's probably got to get there. But it is interesting. Their net's going to be really high. Ken Palm's going to be really high. I just don't know that the win total gets there. And they're not projecting off win total, but it's going to be who have you beat and where have you beat them. SEC is almost going to be an outlier in the algorithms this year, just because they have so many teams. They have so many good teams, kind of like the Big 12. You saw teams like, what was it, TCU a few years ago got in with like 17 or 18 wins. I wonder if that's a path for Vanderbilt. They're going to have to clean up in non-conference play to get the win total up. But I think everything will kind of take care of itself once they get an SEC play numerically wise. And it's going to be an interesting kind of precedent that the committee is going to set this year. Vanderbilt could be a piece of that, because I don't think they're going to be a team that's not on the bubble. I think they're going to be playing meaningful basketball in late February, and that's a huge step for them. I just wonder, could they get in with 17 or 18 wins, right? And that's just such an interesting thing for me to watch, and such an interesting outlier, because our projections can be completely off. I'm saying they could win 19 games and be in the NIT. In reality, that's probably not going to happen. If they win 19 games, they're probably an NCAA tournament team, depending on who they've beat and what the numbers come out to be. But such an interesting theory there, like with what the committee's going to do.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned that there are teams within the last 2 or 3 years to where when you start thinking about it, it is genuinely a path for them if they can get enough wins, and the wins that they get are impressive enough. Like if they can go into an Auburn or an Alabama and steal a game, that is massive. Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that TCU team a couple of years ago that snuck in. I think about the Michigan State team a few years ago that snuck in. Last year, I believe it was Pitt that got into the last 4 because they played in a tough ACC league, got one really big win against Duke, got a couple of wins late in the season in the ACC tournament, got in, made their way to the round of 32. So anything can happen at that time of year, and being able to play in such a deep conference, though it might not have you as high in the standings as you would like, if you get enough wins, and if the wins that you get, especially in conference play, are impressive enough to where they really hold some weight on a resume compared to, say, we'll say, an A10 team, for example. Say Dayton doesn't win their conference. Maybe they're a 20-plus win team, but they lost in the first round to St. Bonaventure. What team is the committee going to put in? 18-win Vanderbilt that has wins against Tennessee or Kentucky or Ole Miss or whoever, or Dayton that might have one good win against VCU at home, but got bounced in their tournament early in what would typically be a one-bid league. So just that whole conversation, obviously that's very far down the line. There's a lot of business that Vanderbilt has to take care of first, but I do think that being outside of that top end conversation. It's not a death sentence for this team. They can still very much be in the tournament conversation, even despite that.
Yeah, I think the non-conference slate is going to be really important for them. You're going to have to go beat Cal. You're going to have to win 2 in Charleston probably. You're going to have to probably beat Virginia Tech. I think that's possible now. Virginia Tech got their butts kicked in a secret scrimmage a couple days ago. Probably got to beat TCU and all the rest of the bye games. Because I think maybe the path for this team is similar to what we thought it was last year, to where they could finish 13th in the SEC, but because their win total got boosted in the non-con, they've got a chance. Because I don't think they're going to go win 10 SEC games. I could be wrong. I just don't see it. I think they're probably going to have a losing record in the SEC by maybe a significant amount just because of their schedule. That's not an indictment against them, but the path's probably going to have to be go win a bunch of non-conference games, boost the net, things along those lines, keep your head above water in league play, and maybe you're not super high in the standings, but the net likes you, Ken Palm likes you, and they've kind of worked to kind of scheme the algorithm in their favor, and I think maybe that could pay off for them down the line.
Yeah, and that's a massive part of this too, is just knowing the system and how to beat it really.
And it's the first time Vanderbilt's known it in a while.
Yes, like being able to play the system to your advantage is a massive thing, because I think that you could argue that the reason Vanderbilt wasn't in the tournament 2 years ago is because they did not play the system well. And obviously, you have your bye games, but when you go and you lose at home to Grambling and then you schedule a game against a tough mid-major in VCU and lose to them by 10, that's going to knock you out of that conversation a little bit easier. While I think, as you mentioned, this staff knows the algorithm a little bit better and how to play it to their advantage, I think, than what the last staff either did or was willing to. So that could potentially make a big difference for this team this year. That could be the difference between being a 2 seed in the NIT or maybe making it in as the last 4 in and having to play in the first 4. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But again, there are some things that are going to have to line up for this team to make that happen. They're going to have to find their way defensively. They're going to have to be able to score enough points when the defense isn't locked in together. And again, the biggest key, they're going to have to win some games that they aren't supposed to win.
And I think a big thing for them too is they could probably get better as the year goes on, just as a result of their depth. It's going to be a tough rotation to project. We do this exercise every year. I think Billy and I might have missed it last year, but Chris has done it for years. I did it with him a couple years ago. We want to project minutes by guy. And you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm on a 200 minute per game scale. There's 40 minutes and a half. 5 guys are on the court at all times. So 200 minutes are going to be played throughout the game. It's really difficult to project this because you look at ESPN's projections and they're way over 200 minutes. Yeah. Like from last year's Vanderbilt roster adds up to like 240 or 250 minutes. So I don't really know what to do with that. I'm going a little over 200 minutes to account for overtime games and things along those lines. So some of these are going to be lower than what they're actually going to be. But let's say this is an average game or an average 3-game span. Here's who's going to play however many minutes. And this is what I'm going to go with. I would say the 5 starters I think are pretty cemented. I think this is probably what it's going to be. And I think the 6th and 7th man are what it's going to be. Past that, it's a little shaky for me. Especially I don't even think Byington knows what it's going to be past 7. But my best guess is Hogard plays 28. He played 28 at Michigan State last year. I think this roster has somewhat comparable depth relative to – I think Michigan State was a better team, obviously, but I think there's enough guys in the backcourt that will take minutes from him and be able to take it off his shoulder. So 28 for Hogard, 27 for Edwards. I just wonder how much he can guard, and does that keep him off the floor a little bit? But he's going to be a go-to guy. He's probably going to be their leading scorer, I would guess, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But those are the guys that are going to have to be on the floor a lot for them. Those are the guys that narrow the talent gap. Hogard's going to make the team run. Edwards is going to be the leading scorer. I don't think there's any doubt that those guys are going to play a lot. It's just whether Edwards plays 26 minutes or 30. That's the big thing. And just based off the scale and how much depth they have, I'm going to say 27. Nickel, I think, is going to play 27. This might be kind of a take, but I think there's a path to where Nickel's their best player. And Edwards, I think, will lead them in scoring. But Nickel, I think, just is kind of the all-around package. He's not just a shooter. He guards. He's tough. Probably their best shooter, honestly. Probably get his own shot. Knows the system. Plays in the system well. I have a hard time seeing him not being one of their better players. Had 27 minutes just because of what else they have on the wing, but I could see it being more than that. Devin McLaughlin at 26. This was one that I think before Kajani Wright would have been a little lower. He's going to have to play a lot, though. He's going to have to play the 5 when Carey goes out. He's going to have to play the 4 when he's in. He's a guy who started off, 32 games for BC last year. He's going to play a lot. 26 is where I have him. I think your numbers will probably be a little higher because I think we're going off a little bit of a different scale, and he'll be a guy I think will be more in yours. Jalen Carey I had at 27 as well. And it's crazy to say because what did he play last year? I think he played like 13 minutes a game.
14.9 minutes per game last year. Yeah.
And that's kind of where we talk about there's a lot on his shoulders, right? If JQ Roberts has to play 20 minutes in the game, he might be in trouble. If Jalen Carey has 2 fouls in the first half and doesn't get it to go in for the last 10 minutes of the first half, you might be in trouble. His margin for error is really small, and I think he's a really talented player, but there's going to be so much on his shoulders. That's one of my questions here. But I do think you're going to see a huge statistical leap from him, from 7 points to maybe being double-figure scorer who's getting close to a double-double on some nights and probably getting a double-double some nights. Van Allen Lubin played 28 for Vandy last year, and I see that as maybe comparable. I think Carey could maybe even get to 28 or 29 a game, which is just crazy to say for a big. But they don't really have anybody else to split time with him. So if he's not in foul trouble, he better be in shape, and he better be ready to play. The 6th man, I think, is probably decidedly MJ Collins. I think he could start some games if they want to go small ball, if they want to, take McLaughlin out or use Edwards as a spark off the bench. I think the 5 is probably set-ish, but Collins, I think, is a guy who could play his way into the lineup some nights. I think he's their best defender. I think he can really go get his own shot, and now that he has some confidence in terms of what he's doing offensively and he has a staff that believes in him, I think he really fits the scheme, playing up and down, getting him in space, allowing him to create his own shot. Collins, I think, could be a real piece for them. And I think it's probably the most underrated guy on the roster who's going to make more of an impact than people think at this point. There's going to be games in February where MJ Collins is a 14 or 15-point scorer, and I don't think people realize that right now. I think people look at him and say, man, he's a good athlete, but the numbers last year weren't great. Way better in the second half last year than he was, and he's guarding the other team's best player dang near every time he's on the floor. How do you not put that guy on the floor? I think he could start. I just think there's a lot of guys ahead of him who it's hard to pull him from the lineup, but if there's one injury, MJ Collins is the guy. If they want to play a different matchup, MJ Collins is the guy. He'll start some games this year, and he's going to play starter minutes, I would say. 7, I'd say Chris Magnon. I just wonder kind of how his game fits into the scheme. The analytics love Chris Magnon. I don't think his game is really shooting threes, and I do think getting up and down can help a little bit. I think he can guard. I think he can rebound, and I think they need that. He has a skill set that they don't really have elsewhere, especially on the wing. But also, I just think they have a lot of depth there. They've got Tyler Nickel, who's going to play 27 at least. I would say MJ Collins is going to play 17 to 20. Where does Chris Magnon fit into all that? I'm not sure, but I think he is the 7. And then the 8, I mentioned, pretty difficult for me. Grant Huffman, I think if the season started today would be the 8th. I have him at 11. Alex Hemingway, I have at 10. He's hurt. I don't know if he's going to be ready for the opener. I don't think he'll be that far off from being ready for the opener if he's not. But I would guess Grant Huffman is what he is, right? He's going to go into game. He's going to defend. He's going to control the game from either guard spot. I think he'll score a little bit. He'll have some nice finishes around the bucket, but he's not going to be a 40% three-point shooter. I just think having a veteran who can run the offense at that level and maybe be a leader in some senses too is really helpful. Alex Hemingway, I think, is almost comparable to Tyler Nickel, except older and a little bit slower. I think he can really shoot. He's probably their second best shooter. Can he stay on the floor? Can he stay healthy? I think is a big thing for him as well. I think that maybe boosts MJ Collins, maybe boosts Chris Magnon if Hemingway can't stay on the floor. He's had injury issues throughout the last couple of years. I think he's a really valuable shooter for them, though. And if he gets in the game in February and knocks down a few shots, I wouldn't be surprised. He's a vet who knows the Power 5 level. He's done a lot of things on it. And I think he'll be a contributor for them, whether that's the 8th man, the 9th man, whatever. He'll be in the game. And I think they're going to play more than 8. So I don't want to – I think the top 7 are decided. 8, 9, 10, I think they're probably going to go 9 or 10 just about every game, and maybe some games more than that based off matchups. So I'm not going in here saying, man, they're going to only play this amount of guys, and I don't know what they're going to do otherwise. But that's what I have. And then Tyler Tanner, I think I have as my 10. Huffman's going to play a little more to start the year. I'd guess Tanner probably precedes him by the end of the year. JQ Roberts I had a really hard time with. I think I have him at 10. It's weird because I have Tanner ahead of him on the depth chart, but I have Roberts playing more minutes because I think they're going to need to call on him a little more. I think it's largely the same JQ Roberts as last year. I don't think there's a drastic leap, although I think he is better than he was last year. They're just going to need him more, and he's going to give him a different look. He's going to play two positions. And then Jordan Williams, I had at one. I think he's a guy worth noting, but is not going to be a guy that gets on the floor a ton. So, Brandon, that's what I've got. Any major differences?
I don't think there's too much that's different. A couple of slight things just because of the scale within the minutes, obviously. It's so hard to be able to truly calculate how many minutes each guy is going to play. ESPN had like well north of 200, and then you typically try to go around that 200 scale. So mine is a little bit above 200, but I think that the general premise of what we both have is pretty similar. I have the same starting five: Hoggard, Edwards, Nickel, McLaughlin, and Carey. I have Hoggard playing at around 30 minutes a game. I think that they're really going to rely on him to be just that steady two-way guy that they can trust to run the floor. They know that he can score when he's out there. He can play well on the defensive end. And again, when you have Edwards next to him, who isn't horrible defensively, I don't think is going to be someone that you're looking to rely on that end of the floor. I feel like that the importance of having Hoggard out there with him is going to be huge. So I have him at 30. I have Edwards at 27. I'm with you on Tyler Nickel. I don't know if he'll be Vanderbilt's best player at the end of the year, but I definitely think he could be arguably their most important player. And you could almost say, though their play styles are very different, it's almost like a Jordan Wright effect, right? Mm-hmm. Jordan Wright, I don't think anyone would say he was their best player at any point during his Vanderbilt career, but I do think that there were a lot of games where Jordan Wright was bar none their most important player, even when they had Scottie Pippen Jr., even when they had Liam Robbins, just what he was able to do on both sides and the impact he was able to make. So I think Tyler Nickel can have that same impact. I have him in around 23 to 25 minutes a game. McLaughlin, kind of the same thing with you. I think that if you had the depth of Kajani Wright's in the lineup, I think that the minutes go down for him, but I have McLaughlin also at around 23 minutes a game. His versatility, I think, is valuable. I think his ability to do a lot of different things well is going to help as well. I don't think he's necessarily elite at one particular thing, but I think that he is a very balanced player that can give them a lot of different things at different moments.
Can I bring something up about him too?
Yeah.
He played 30 minutes a game last year at BC, and we're projecting him to play, I think, 20. I had 26, you had 23.
25, actually. 25. I misread that. Yeah, 25.
I mean, that's a testament to the depth they have, right?
Yeah. So, and remember, BC was a team that did not have nearly as much depth as what Vanderbilt has this year. We saw that BC team up close and personal last year in Memorial Gym, and McLaughlin was out there a lot in that game. Jalen Carey, this is probably be a little bit surprising. I have him at around 28 minutes a game. I just think that the importance that he's going to have out there, and again, just not knowing what J.Q. Roberts is going to be able to bring yet is going to put a little bit more pressure on Jalen Carey to be out there more. And, it could be at the end of the year that maybe it's even close to 30. We're not really sure on how things are going to go, the way that these games are going to flow. They might decide they want to play a little bit smaller ball at sometimes. You might even see Devin McLaughlin line up at the 5 at some point.
I think you'll see it a lot.
Yeah, I think that could be something you really see, especially if Jalen Carey does have a situation like you mentioned. He has 2 fouls in the first half, and all of a sudden, he's got to come out until after halftime. So that's something you can see a little bit, but I think they're going to try to keep him out there as much as they can and really be that lockdown guy down low. So I have him at 28. First guy off the bench, I have MJ Collins. I love MJ Collins this game. I think he's actually someone that can really take a leap and could arguably be one of Vanderbilt's best players at some point in his career here. I have him at 23 minutes a game, and again, just that defensive aspect of his game is such a big thing. He can jump, he can run, he's a capable scorer, and you have to remember, MJ Collins at the end of last season genuinely was one of Virginia Tech's best players down the stretch.
He played 30 minutes a game too.
Yeah, he also played 20, and I have him at 23. So that just, again, goes to show you how much depth is on this Vanderbilt team.
If there's one guy that I'm looking to improve or up my minutes on, it's MJ Collins.
Yeah.
I don't think he's actually going to play 17 minutes. I think it's going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah, which is why I put him in around that 23, just because I think it's going to be higher than that. And again, you mentioned Jason Edwards with the defensive capabilities. Though you do value that scoring, it wouldn't surprise me if there were some situations where there's 2 minutes left in the game and maybe Jason Edwards is out there, but maybe MJ Collins, if he's scoring well enough, you put him out there because he is a very capable defender, especially on the SEC level. I have Huffman in around 16 minutes. I think just his ability to be a floor general, to come in, run things, he's going to be able to run the offense and run it well. not going to make too many mistakes, has enough of a scoring ability, I think, to be impactful on that end. He's someone I think that you'll probably see come in more or less when one of Hogarth or Edwards are out. So I would rely on him to kind of be that floor general off the bench. Mannion, I have at 12 minutes. Again, I just don't know what he can necessarily bring yet at a Power 5 level. I think he has some capability. I think he can score a little bit. I think he showed some defensive promise when he was at Cornell. It's just, again, the Ivy League and the SEC, so much different. That's such a jump in competition. And we've seen in the past where guys have made that jump from the mid-major level, and it didn't necessarily apply once they got to the SEC. We saw that a little bit last year with Evan Taylor. And Evan Taylor, much different player than Chris Mannion is, but it's just an example of how that step up in competition sometimes can have an impact on a player. Mm-hmm. Then past him, I have J.Q. Roberts next on the depth chart just because of, again, the position. I have him at around 13 minutes. Could be a little bit higher just depending on how non-conference goes and how we see him play. I don't know how much – I don't want to say I don't know how much I trust J.Q. Roberts because I do think he's someone that has a lot of potential. I think he's someone that the staff believes in. And, Joey, this was something I said over the summer, but if Mark Byington didn't see something in J.Q. Roberts, he would not be on this team.
Right.
He would not be in the program. I can promise you that. And – I think he sees something in J.Q. Roberts. I think J.Q. Roberts is athletic. I think he's instinctive. It's just a matter of putting everything else together for him to be able to unleash some of that. And do I think that's going to happen this year? Not sure. I think we'll see glimpses of it, but I don't know if he's someone that Vanderbilt's going to ideally rely on to play 15-plus minutes a game. And I think if you are in that situation, you're feeling a little bit trepidatious about where you are.
Good vocabulary.
I try to. So, I think that's something that they're going to try to avoid, but around that 13-minute mark, I think that's reasonable for him for the role he has to play. I have Hemingway at 10 minutes. I think that he's going to be someone that, again, the injuries are going to be a question. How often can he stay out there? What role can he carve out for himself other than just being someone that's a light-out shooter? But he is someone that has that shooting ability, and that is valuable, especially in this system. He's also a veteran, comes from a good program in Clemson. I think he'll get around 10 minutes a game. And I have Tyler Tanner at 8, but kind of like what you said with being conservative with MJ Collins' minutes, I'm doing the same thing with Tyler Tanner. I think he could be closer around 12-ish minutes towards the end of the year. I think that they like his game a lot. He obviously has plenty of bounce. He's great with the ball in his hands. And really, and you wrote a piece about it back in July, the defense of Tyler Tanner has really been what has been the revelation to the staff over the summer. They love what he can do defensively. And again, if you have a situation where maybe someone goes down, maybe if it's Edwards or Hogarth or MJ Collins, I wouldn't be surprised if Tyler Tanner, if he proves enough in the non-conference schedule, is maybe around 15 minutes per game if the right things line up for him. So I have him at 8 just being on the more conservative side, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was in double figures by the end of the year.
Yeah, I look at Tyler Tanner kind of like I looked at Paul Lewis his freshman year, and I think Tyler Tanner is a lot better than Paul Lewis is. Paul Lewis played about 10. And that was with Ezra Mannion ahead of him. Tyler Tanner also has a couple older guys ahead of him. So that's kind of where I'm projecting 8 to 10 or so. I think Tyler Tanner, though, is the future of the program, as Mark Byington said a couple days ago. And that's a guy that's going to have to play a lot down the stretch. Maybe not this year, but, I mean, he's their starting point guard maybe next year, right? So that's a big thing for Vanderbilt is his development. And I think you see that at times this year. I think you see him grow up quickly at times. I wonder how ready he is. I think he's a much better scorer than Lewis. I think he's probably a better distributor than Lewis was his freshman year as well. So there's a lot more there. It's just there's also a lot more ahead of him. It's not just Ezra Mannion ahead of him. He's not quite the backup point guard yet. He's got to fight for that. And I think he overtakes Grant Huffman at some point throughout the year in terms of the minutes they're playing, at least based off some matchups. So that's what I look at. Brandon, before we get out of here, give me your best player. Give me your most important player. Give me your most improved player relative to the stop they were last year, and I'll piggyback off what you say because I think our answers will probably be pretty similar.
Yeah, best player for me, I think, is going to be Jason Edwards. I just think that, he's going to be someone to where there's going to be some shots where you're like, oh, don't love that. But I also think that there's going to be some that's like, man, this dude can really ball out. And he's someone that I think is capable of giving you 20 plus on any given night. There's going to be some where, again, he might not hit 10 because the shots just aren't falling, and he's going to take a lot of them. But the talent is there. The talent is undeniable. And if you even go back and look at some of his games with North Texas, when he was playing SEC teams, ACC teams, those Power 5 conference teams, he was still able to score at a pretty good rate. So I think he's someone that you can probably rely on to score a good bit each night. So I think he'll probably be their best player. Their most important player, and Joe, I'm going to be interested to see where you go with this because I think there's a few guys you can mention. I think you could talk about A.J. Hoggard. I think you could talk about Tyler Nickel. I think you could even maybe argue M.J. Collins just because of his role coming off the bench as a potential six-man. I think it's Jalen Carey.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, again, no pun intended, the load he's gonna have to carry for that front court, being that lockdown five, being the guy that can stay out on the floor, not get in foul trouble, rebound, defend to the paint. There is a ton of responsibility on this guy's shoulders, especially for someone that, again, is coming in from James Madison after playing 15 to 14 minutes per game. Now you're asking him to take a step up in the level of competition while also playing probably north of 25 minutes a game. Mm-hmm. So I think just his role is important because then if he plays well, if he takes that leap, then you're maybe looking at a few more wins in this team than what you thought. And if he doesn't, or if something happens where he gets hurt or he gets in foul trouble, then you're relying on someone like J.Q. Roberts to have to take that step. And I don't know if you feel as confident in that as you feel in Jalen Carey doing so. And then for the player I think is going to take the biggest step, I think it is M.J. Collins. I think that he carries over some of that momentum that we saw last year. I love what he can do defensively. I think he's a capable scorer. If there wasn't so much depth at the guard position, I think that he would be someone you would talk about being in the starting lineup. But again, I don't think he's someone that you're going to put over a Jason Edwards or an A.J. Hoggard. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if in a year or two you had a backcourt starring him and Tyler Tanner. And those are two guys that I think, Tyler Tanner being an honorable mention, that can take a leap and do a little bit more than what some fans coming in expect them to. It just feels like not a lot of people are talking about M.J. Collins. And I think he's someone that come February, you're like, he is not just one of their most important players, but he is someone that has taken arguably the biggest leap from where he was at Virginia Tech last year to where he is at the end of the season.
For sure. I'll go quick because we got to get to Chapel, Brandon. But I think their best player is going to be A.J. Hoggard. The leading scorer, I think, will be Jason Edwards. But I think Hoggard just does so much for him. I think he is a Swiss Army knife in a lot of senses. Almost reminds me of Jordan Wright, a guy who got a lot of flack from the fan base, but was more valuable than they probably envisioned him actually being. I think as you look more deeply into the game, you see how valuable he is. I think that's Hoggard. I think Nickel is also a guy there who could be a factor. I think they have three guys who on any given night could be their best player. Nickel, Edwards, Hoggard. Their most important player, to me, no-brainer, Jalen Carey. I mean, there's so much on his shoulders, like you already explained. They could be in real trouble if he gets hurt. And that's kind of how I look at this one. If Hoggard gets hurt or is out for a game, Grant Huffman could step in, Tyler Tanner could step in. They'd be not great, but they'd be all right. Jalen Carey, if he gets hurt, they're in trouble. It's going to be a rough night. And then most improved relative to expectation or their performance last year, M.J. Collins. I think no-brainer. We're both really high on him, and I still don't know if we're talking about him quite enough. And I think that says something. Brandon, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I'm just interested to see how this team looks. And again, I think that the non-conference is going to be a very good teller of where this program it is and where it could be headed towards conference play, especially during this November stretch where you have Cal, you have the Charleston Classic. Those are going to be some very important games there. I think that in a month's time, we could either be saying Vanderbilt's putting themselves in position to maybe be in the bubble conversation comes conference play, or we're saying, okay, maybe things aren't gelling as quickly as what you ideally would like to see. And I'm just very interested to see how quickly things gel for this team and what they look like in that non-conference play, especially with Cal being, the third game on the conference schedule. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. But, Joey, we're almost there. Less than a week, man. Less than a week.
Less than a week away from tip-off at Memorial Gym. Brandon and I will be there. Billy will be there. Chris will probably be there, too. It's going to be a Vandy sports reunion of sorts. And we'll have a lot of coverage game by game. We got to focus on football, though, for the remainder of the week. I think this will be our last basketball show until tip-off. Maybe we'll do something the night before or something. But, Brandon, thanks for joining me. And I think you guys are going to see a lot of Brandon throughout the year. And hopefully you like him because you're going to get sick of him if not. You're probably sick of me already. So glad to have a new voice in here. And thanks for watching another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast.